The rain drummed against the windows of the small cottage in Yorkshire as Margaret Thompson sat by her dying husband's bedside. For 47 years they had shared everything together, their dreams, their struggles, and their unwavering love for each other. Now, at 82, she watched helplessly as cancer slowly stole away the man who had been her anchor through life's storms. Harold had been a postal worker his entire career, walking the same routes through their village for decades. Everyone knew his warm smile and cheerful wave. Children would run to meet him, knowing he always carried a pocket full of sweets. Even in retirement, he volunteered at the local food bank and helped elderly neighbors with their shopping. As Margaret held Harold's frail hand, she remembered their wedding day in 1977. They had saved every penny for months to afford a small ceremony at the village church. The reception was held in Margaret's mother's garden, with homemade sandwiches and a simple cake. They couldn't afford a honeymoon, but they didn't care. They had each other, and that was enough. Harold's breathing became labored, and Margaret leaned closer to hear his whispered words. "Our golden anniversary," he murmured weakly. "I wanted to dance with you one more time." Their 50th wedding anniversary was just 3 weeks away, a milestone they had both looked forward to celebrating. Margaret felt her heart break as she realized they might not make it to that special day. The doctors had been honest about Harold's condition. They had done everything possible, but the cancer had spread too far. It was now a matter of days, perhaps hours. Margaret had accepted this reality, but the thought of celebrating their anniversary alone filled her with overwhelming sadness. Their daughter Sarah lived in London, working 2 jobs to support her own family. She visited whenever she could, but the distance and expenses made frequent trips difficult. Their son Michael had moved to Australia 15 years ago, and while he called regularly, he couldn't afford to fly back on short notice. Margaret felt more alone than she had ever felt in her entire life. As the evening grew darker, Margaret noticed Harold's wedding ring had become loose on his finger. He had lost so much weight during his illness that the simple gold band, worn smooth by decades of wear, now slipped easily off his hand. She carefully removed it and held it close to her heart, remembering the day they had exchanged vows and promised to love each other through sickness and health. The village had been like family to them over the years. Their neighbors had brought meals, offered help with shopping, and provided emotional support during Harold's illness. But Margaret knew that after Harold passed away, the cottage would feel empty and cold. The silence would be deafening after a lifetime of shared conversations, laughter, and gentle companionship. That night, as Harold slept fitfully, Margaret wrote a letter to the local newspaper. She poured her heart out, describing their love story and their upcoming anniversary. She didn't expect anyone to read it or care about 2 ordinary people from a small village. She simply needed to express her feelings and honor the man who had been her everything. In her letter, Margaret wrote about Harold's kindness, his dedication to their community, and their simple but profound love. She mentioned how they had planned to renew their vows on their golden anniversary, something they had talked about for years. She described their modest dreams and how they had found joy in the smallest moments together. The next morning, Margaret sealed the letter and walked slowly to the village post office. The postmaster, who had known Harold for decades, accepted the letter with gentle understanding. As Margaret walked home, she had no idea that her simple act of love and grief would soon touch hearts far beyond her small Yorkshire village. 3 days later, Harold peacefully passed away in his sleep with Margaret holding his hand. The funeral was small but heartfelt, attended by neighbors and friends who had known the couple for decades. The village church was filled with stories of Harold's kindness and the beautiful love he shared with Margaret. After the service, Margaret returned to their empty cottage, feeling lost and broken. The silence was overwhelming. For the first time in nearly 5 decades, she was truly alone. She moved through their home like a ghost, touching Harold's belongings and remembering their life together. Meanwhile, at the offices of the Yorkshire Evening Post, junior reporter Emma Clark was sorting through the Daily Mail. Among the usual letters and press releases, she found Margaret's handwritten note. Something about the elderly woman's words touched her deeply. The raw emotion and genuine love expressed in the simple letter moved Emma to tears. Emma had been working at the newspaper for only 6 months, mostly covering local events and writing small community stories. But Margaret's letter felt different. It spoke of real love, loss, and the kind of devotion that seemed rare in today's world. Emma decided to visit Margaret and learn more about her story. When Emma knocked on Margaret's door, she found a tiny woman with kind eyes red from crying. Margaret invited her in for tea, grateful for any company that might ease her loneliness. As they sat in the small living room, surrounded by photographs spanning 5 decades of marriage, Margaret shared her story. Emma learned about Harold's postal route, his volunteer work, and the countless small acts of kindness that had defined his character. Margaret showed her their wedding album, pointing out friends and family members, many of whom had passed away over the years. She spoke about their dreams, their struggles during difficult financial times, and the joy they found in simple pleasures like gardening together and watching old movies on Sunday afternoons. As Margaret talked, Emma realized this wasn't just a local interest story. This was a testament to enduring love and human decency that deserved a wider audience. She asked Margaret's permission to write about her and Harold's love story for the newspaper. Margaret was hesitant at first. She had never sought attention or publicity. She and Harold had lived quiet, private lives, finding happiness in their small circle of family and friends. But Emma explained how their story could inspire others and honor Harold's memory in a meaningful way. The article Emma wrote was beautiful and moving. She captured the essence of Harold and Margaret's relationship, their upcoming anniversary that would never be celebrated, and the profound grief of a woman who had lost her soulmate. The story was published on a Friday morning, accompanied by a photograph of Harold and Margaret on their wedding day. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By afternoon, the newspaper's phones were ringing constantly. Readers called to express their sympathy and share their own stories of love and loss. Many people said the article had moved them to tears and reminded them of what was truly important in life. Local radio stations picked up the story, and by evening, it had spread to regional television news. Social media users began sharing the article, adding their own heartfelt comments about the power of true love and the importance of cherishing the people we hold dear. What started as one woman's private grief had become a public celebration of love, commitment, and human goodness. Margaret, still processing her loss, was amazed by the outpouring of support from complete strangers who had been touched by her and Harold's story. Emma continued to visit Margaret, bringing her updates about the story's reach and the kind messages pouring in from around the country. For the first time since Harold's death, Margaret felt less alone. She began to understand that their love story had meaning beyond their small village. Within days, Margaret and Harold's story had reached national news outlets. Television producers called requesting interviews. Newspapers across the country reprinted Emma's article. The story resonated with people from all walks of life, reminding them of their own parents, grandparents, or their own hopes for lasting love. At Kensington Palace, Princess Catherine was having her morning coffee while scrolling through news stories on her tablet. As the mother of 3 young children and someone deeply committed to family values, she was always moved by stories about love, commitment, and community spirit. When she read about Margaret and Harold, she felt an immediate connection to their story. Catherine showed the article to Prince William, who was equally touched by the couple's devotion to each other and Harold's service to his community. The story reminded them of their own grandparents and the values they hoped to instill in their children. They discussed how Margaret must be feeling, alone after nearly 50 years of marriage, facing what should have been a joyous anniversary celebration. The royal couple had always believed in using their platform to bring comfort and joy to people during difficult times. They had visited hospitals, supported charities, and worked tirelessly to make a positive difference in people's lives. Margaret's story spoke to them on a personal level, beyond their official duties. William and Catherine spent the weekend discussing how they might help Margaret. They didn't want to create a media spectacle or intrude on her grief. Instead, they wanted to find a meaningful way to honor Harold's memory and show Margaret that her love story had touched even them. Their private secretary suggested a simple written message of condolence, which was the traditional royal response to such situations. But William and Catherine felt this situation called for something more personal and meaningful. They wanted to do something that would truly honor the couple's golden anniversary and bring some light to Margaret's darkness. After much discussion with their staff, they decided on a plan that was both appropriate and heartfelt. They would make a private visit to Margaret's village without media fanfare or official photographers. This would be about genuine human connection, not public relations or photo opportunities. The palace contacted the local authorities and Emma Clark at the Yorkshire Evening Post to coordinate the visit. Everyone involved was sworn to secrecy until after the visit was complete. The goal was to surprise Margaret and give her a moment of joy without turning it into a circus. Margaret, meanwhile, was slowly adjusting to life alone. Neighbors continued to check on her, bringing meals and offering companionship. The letters and cards from strangers around the country provided comfort during her darkest moments. She had created a special box to keep all the kind messages, reading them whenever she felt overwhelmed by loneliness. Emma Clark had become a regular visitor, bringing updates about the story's continued impact. She told Margaret about support groups for widows that had formed after reading the article, and about couples who had decided to renew their vows inspired by Harold and Margaret's love story. One elderly man from Scotland wrote to say that Margaret's story had convinced him to finally propose to his longtime girlfriend. A young woman in London mentioned that the article had inspired her to call her grandparents more often. These stories brought Margaret both joy and sadness, joy that their love was inspiring others, and sadness that Harold couldn't witness the impact of their story. The village had also been transformed by the attention. The local church had received donations from around the country, allowing them to repair their roof and update their heating system. The food bank where Harold had volunteered saw an increase in both donations and volunteers. His legacy of kindness was continuing even after his death. As Margaret's anniversary date approached, she felt both dread and anticipation. She had planned to spend the day quietly at Harold's graveside, perhaps taking him flowers and telling him about all the kind people who had written to her. She had no idea that William and Catherine were planning to make this day unforgettable. On the morning of what would have been Margaret and Harold's golden wedding anniversary, Margaret woke with a heavy heart. She had barely slept, thinking about all the celebrations they had planned but would never share. She dressed carefully in her best blue dress, the same color she had worn to their wedding 5 decades earlier. Margaret had prepared a small bouquet of Harold's favorite roses from their garden. She planned to take them to his grave and spend the day talking to him, sharing memories of their wedding day and their life together. The village church bells were ringing as she prepared to leave, their sound both comforting and heartbreaking. Unknown to Margaret, preparations had been quietly taking place around the village all morning. The local police had discreetly positioned themselves along the main road, and the vicar had been informed of the special visit. Emma Clark waited nervously at the newspaper office, hoping everything would go smoothly. As Margaret walked slowly toward the churchyard, carrying her flowers and Harold's favorite photograph, a small convoy of cars appeared on the village's main street. The vehicles were modest and unmarked, designed to attract as little attention as possible. Margaret noticed them but assumed they belonged to visitors or perhaps funeral attendees. She was kneeling beside Harold's grave, arranging the roses and speaking softly to him about their anniversary, when she heard footsteps approaching behind her. Thinking it was probably the vicar or a neighbor checking on her, she didn't turn around immediately. When Margaret finally looked up, she gasped in complete shock. Prince William and Princess Catherine were walking toward her, dressed simply and carrying a beautiful arrangement of white lilies. Their faces showed genuine warmth and compassion as they approached the grieving widow. Margaret struggled to stand, her hands shaking with emotion and surprise. She had seen the royal couple countless times on television and in newspapers, but never imagined she would meet them in person, especially not on this most difficult day of her life. Catherine reached Margaret first, gently taking her hands and speaking softly. "Mrs. Thompson, we read about you and Harold, and we wanted to come and pay our respects on what should have been your golden anniversary. We hope you don't mind us intruding on this special day." William placed the white lilies beside Harold's headstone and said, "Harold sounds like he was an extraordinary man who served his community with dedication and love. We wanted to honor his memory and tell you how much your love story has touched our hearts." Margaret was overwhelmed, tears streaming down her face as she tried to process what was happening. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, future King and Queen of England, had come to her small village to comfort her on her anniversary. It seemed impossible, like something from a dream. Catherine noticed Margaret's trembling hands and gently guided her to a nearby bench. "Please tell us about Harold," she said with genuine interest. "We'd love to hear about your wedding day and your life together." For the next hour, Margaret shared stories about Harold that she had never told anyone except family. She spoke about his proposal in their local park, their modest wedding ceremony, and their honeymoon that consisted of a weekend in nearby Blackpool, because it was all they could afford. William and Catherine listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and sharing their own reflections on marriage and commitment. They talked about the importance of small gestures, daily kindness, and finding joy in simple moments together. Margaret felt as though she was talking with old friends rather than members of the royal family. As they talked, other villagers began to gather at a respectful distance, amazed by what they were witnessing. Children peeked around trees, and elderly neighbors watched from their windows, all moved by the compassion being shown to one of their own. Catherine had brought something special with her, a handwritten letter from Queen Elizabeth II, expressing her condolences and admiration for Harold and Margaret's enduring love. The letter acknowledged their service to their community and the inspiration their story had provided to people across the nation. As the afternoon continued, William and Catherine's visit became more than just a condolence call. They genuinely wanted to celebrate Margaret and Harold's love story and make this anniversary day special despite Harold's absence. Catherine had coordinated with the village church to arrange a small memorial service. The vicar had prepared the same church where Margaret and Harold had exchanged vows 50 years earlier. Villagers quietly filled the pews, many of them carrying flowers or small mementos to honor Harold's memory. The church was decorated simply but beautifully, with white roses and candles creating a warm, peaceful atmosphere. Margaret was amazed to see so many familiar faces gathered together. Her neighbors, the postmaster who had known Harold for decades, children from the local school where Harold had volunteered, and elderly residents he had helped with shopping and household tasks. The entire community had come together to celebrate their love story. William stood and addressed the gathered congregation with words that came straight from his heart. He spoke about the importance of service, commitment, and the kind of quiet heroism that Harold had demonstrated throughout his life. He talked about how true love stories aren't always the ones we see in movies, but often the ones lived quietly in small communities by ordinary people, doing extraordinary things for each other. Catherine shared her own thoughts about marriage and partnership, speaking about the strength that comes from having someone who believes in you through all of life's challenges. She mentioned how Margaret and Harold's story had reminded her and William of what truly matters in any relationship: daily kindness, mutual respect, and unwavering support. The most moving moment came when the congregation sang Harold's favorite hymn, "How Great Thou Art." Margaret's voice wavered as she sang, but she was supported by the voices of her entire community and the royal couple who had come to honor her husband's memory. After the service, Catherine presented Margaret with a special gift, a photo album containing copies of all the letters and messages that had been sent to the newspaper after Harold's story was published. People from across Britain and even from other countries had written to express their condolences and share how the story had touched their lives. One letter was from a young soldier serving overseas, who wrote that Harold's example of service had inspired him during difficult times. Another came from a couple celebrating their own golden anniversary, who said Margaret and Harold's love story had renewed their appreciation for each other. There were letters from children, grandparents, newlyweds, and people who had lost their own spouses. Margaret was overwhelmed by the volume of correspondence and the heartfelt sentiments expressed by so many strangers. Each letter represented someone whose life had been touched by her and Harold's simple love story. She realized that their quiet life together had somehow become a beacon of hope for others. William and Catherine also announced that they had established a small fund in Harold's name to support the local food bank and community services where he had volunteered. They wanted to ensure that his legacy of helping others would continue long after their visit. As the day drew to a close, Margaret walked with William and Catherine back to Harold's grave. The white lilies they had brought earlier now lay beside Margaret's roses, and the setting sun cast a gentle light over the peaceful churchyard. Catherine placed her hand on Margaret's shoulder and said, "Harold may not be here physically, but his love surrounds you every day. And now his story has brought love and inspiration to thousands of people he never met. That's a beautiful legacy." William added, "You and Harold have shown us all what true love looks like. It's not grand gestures or perfect moments. It's choosing each other every single day and finding joy in the journey together. As Margaret hugged the royal couple goodbye, she felt something she hadn't experienced since Harold's death, a sense of peace and purpose. Their visit had transformed what she had expected to be the worst day of her life into something beautiful and meaningful. In the weeks following William and Catherine's visit, Margaret's life took on new meaning and purpose. The story of the royal couple's compassionate gesture spread around the world, inspiring countless people and demonstrating the power of human kindness during difficult times. Margaret became an unexpected symbol of enduring love and resilience. Letters continued to arrive from around the globe, with people sharing their own stories of loss, love, and hope. She read every single one, often writing back to those who included return addresses. Her small cottage became a center of connection for people seeking comfort and understanding. The village itself was transformed by the attention. Tourism increased modestly but respectfully, with visitors coming to see the church where Margaret and Harold had married and to pay their respects at his grave. Local businesses saw gentle growth, and the community spirit that had always existed was strengthened and celebrated. Emma Clark continued to document Margaret's journey, writing follow-up articles about the ongoing impact of the royal visit and Harold's legacy. She watched Margaret evolve from a woman consumed by grief into someone who had found purpose in helping others navigate their own losses. Margaret began volunteering at a grief support group in the neighboring town, sharing her story and offering comfort to other widows and widowers. Her experience with public attention and the kindness of strangers had given her unique insights into healing and hope that she wanted to share with others facing similar challenges. The fund established in Harold's name grew beyond anyone's expectations. Donations came from individuals, businesses, and organizations who had been moved by the story. The money supported not only the local food bank, but also programs for isolated elderly residents and community initiatives that brought people together. On quiet evenings, Margaret would sit in her garden with Harold's photograph and the album of letters Catherine had given her. She would read aloud to him about the lives their love story had touched, the couples who had been inspired to renew their vows, and the children who had learned about the importance of kindness from Harold's example. Margaret often reflected on how a simple letter written in her darkest hour had led to such an extraordinary outpouring of love and support. She realized that grief, while deeply personal, could also connect people across all boundaries of geography, culture, and social status. The anniversary date that she had dreaded became an annual celebration in the village. Each year, the community gathered at the church to honor not only Harold's memory, but also to celebrate the enduring love stories within their own families. William and Catherine sent flowers and a personal note each year, maintaining their connection to Margaret and her community. Margaret's story became part of the curriculum at the local school, teaching children about service, love, and the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. Harold's example of daily kindness became a model for how young people could make a difference in their own communities. As Margaret entered her 80s, she remained active and engaged, serving as a grandmother figure to many young families in the village. Her home became a gathering place for celebrations, a sanctuary for those facing difficulties, and a repository of wisdom about love, loss, and the resilience of the human spirit. The simple love story of Margaret and Harold Thompson had grown into something far greater than either of them could have imagined. Their 50 years of quiet devotion had become a source of inspiration for millions, proving that ordinary people living ordinary lives with extraordinary love could change the world in ways they never expected. Margaret often said that while she missed Harold every single day, she was grateful that their love story had brought so much joy and hope to others. She believed that Harold would be proud to know that his legacy of kindness continued to ripple outward, touching lives and inspiring love in ways that would endure long after their own earthly journey had ended. Their golden anniversary had been celebrated after all, not just by two people, but by an entire nation that had been moved to tears by the power of true love and royal compassion.